Hi everybody, today we are going to be making zucchini and tomato, which is the very first recipe I ever learned how to make from my grandmother. And the very first thing we're going to start doing today is dicing up our onion. Your onion has a top and a bottom. The bottom is the roots, and it's like what I like to call the hairy part. So this is the part that we never want to cut off, or we want to avoid cutting. We actually want to cut from the top, and then we're going to do a line vertical from the top down to the bottom. If you're going to do something like onion rings, then you turn it this way and then you cut like this because it creates circles. But for most people, when you're dicing or chopping an onion, you want to keep it in this shape. All right, so I have my onion down. Since it's a round object and it's going to roll around a lot, we want to create a flat surface. So I'm just going to take the top off. And then I'm going to throw it in my discard bowl, whatever I don't want to use, because I'm going to use that later for making stock. And then now that the top is gone, I'm going to flip it upside down so that I have a flat surface and it's not going to roll around. And I'm just going to slice it down the middle. Okay. Now that I have it sliced in the middle, I can actually access the first layer of peel and just peel that off. And that's going to go into my discard bowl as well. And none of this is going to get wasted because we're going to put it in the freezer and eventually make some broth out of it. So when my grandmother taught me this recipe, I don't know that she really wanted me to cook that day, but her arthritis was acting up and she couldn't do anything. But she was hungry and we both needed to eat and my mom was at home. So she actually made me do this. Okay, so we have our onion and now we have like two flat surfaces. We're gonna lay it flat like this. And what I'm gonna wanna do is I'm gonna actually, while it's laying flat on the table, I'm gonna cut it this way first, and then I'm gonna cut it this way to create squares, okay, so that I can dice it properly. So the way we're gonna do this is you're gonna lay your palm flat on top of the onion. Here, I'm gonna move this out of the way and this out of the way so that you can see better. You're gonna lay it flat, and then the knife is just gonna go like this. So the knife will go like this while your hand is on top, and the hand is just holding it in place, okay? You're gonna keep your fingers out of the way, and then you're gonna go ahead and score to get that nice dice. If you wanted to do a finer dice, you could do more than one cut horizontally, but we don't really need to do that for this dish. It's actually a very rustic dish. It's a village dish. You don't have to have like perfectly diced anything. It's meant to be very homemade and very comforting. So usually when I get to this point, I can either stop cutting up my onion or I flip it over and I just kind of work around it to get as much of the onion as I can. And then I have just this tiny little nub. And we're gonna do the same thing with the other half. Okay. All right. Our onion is nice and diced and ready to go. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put 2 tablespoons of olive oil in my frying pan. I don't usually measure this out. It just needs to be enough to coat the bottom of your pan. So it might be, if it's like a wider pan, you might need more than 2 tablespoons. Whatever you feel is comfortable for you. All right, we're just going to let this, we want it to be on medium heat because we're going to let the onions go for about 5 minutes. Just until they're softened. While these onions are cooking up, I'm going to actually turn mine down even a little bit so that we can start working on dicing our zucchini. Because I don't want it to burn, so I'm actually going to go as low as possible. But you can do yours at medium heat, medium low. So for the zucchini, I actually have a few different varieties here. And I really like using a bunch of different kinds of zucchini and summer squash because I like the different colors. And the different shapes. So I'm going to start with the one that I'm most familiar with. I've already cut off the top of it, and I'm going to cut off the bottom as well, okay? And those are going to go into our discard pile. It's entirely up to you how you want to dice these. You can dice them really big or really small. It's up to you, but you just want to be consistent and do the same kind of size across all of them, okay? So I'm going to do these. I'm going to cut like that to create flat surfaces. And I'm actually I'm not gonna cut them super small or super big. I'm just gonna make some strips And then I'm gonna turn it, and then I'm just gonna basically dice it. You can cut them smaller if you'd like, you can leave them bigger if you'd like. But like I said, you just kind of want them to be roughly the same size. They don't have to be perfectly the same. Another key thing when you're chopping like this is you want to make sure that your knife is anchored. I know a lot of people tend to pick up their knife and do this. I think that it's much safer to just keep the tip anchored, and what you're moving is actually the back of the blade, which is where your hand is, and it has a lot more control. Do a little stir. Keep an eye on our onions so they don't burn. Same process. We're going to chop off the top and the bottom. Since this guy's a little bit bigger, I'm actually going to cut him right there. Make a flat surface. And since this one's a little bit thicker than this one, I'm going to actually make multiple strips out of him. This is a great dish to also just practice your knife skills because there's really no rush. You could do all of this beforehand. And the cool thing about it is it really is anything that's within this family. So it could be zucchini, summer squash. There are a lot of other varieties of squash that grow during the season. It's a very clean and healthy dish. There isn't much to it. It's just preparation. If you see something like this, where there are like really big seeds, sometimes these are very bitter. So it's really up to you. You can actually cut off a little bit and taste it to see what it tastes like. If it's super bitter, putting it in a little bit of salt will actually help take away some of the bitterness. Or you can cut it out and make zucchini bread or something out of it, or you could save it for a stock later. So I'm gonna actually not risk it. I'm just gonna cut it out and use it for stock later. But you can totally eat summer squash raw. I just tasted it. It's actually pretty sweet. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and use it. It's really nice. Like, my knife cuts aren't perfect. I'm not going for perfection. I'm gonna stir my onions. I'm starting to smell them. They're still not quite there. I'm gonna turn up my heat a little bit. I try to also reduce the amount of dishes I make, so I use the same bowls for the same thing. Doesn't really seem to make sense to kind of dirty too many bowls. This is really the biggest part of this dish, is just cutting up your vegetables. That's really it. Because the rest of it is just kind of putting it together. And the cook time is about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how big your zucchini is. I would say mine will probably take closer to 20. And it's already starting to smell really good, and all I've done is just sweat these onions. So the last squash that I have is this round-shaped one. And I don't usually work with these, so I think I'm gonna cut it like this. Yeah. And then I will do the same thing with it. I'll cut it into strips. It's really cool looking. I love the skin. That's so beautiful. My onions are starting to brown. So now would be the time that I want to throw in my zucchini. And I have quite a bit of zucchini in here. I'm actually doing more than what the recipe says because I just have a lot more. Once you add your zucchini into the pot, you want to just do a little bit of salt, and that'll help release some of the water. Basically, every time you add an ingredient into your pot, you want to throw in another dash of salt, because every time you add something, you're throwing off the balance. Obviously not too much. You want to make sure that you're not over salting. But when you're using things like zucchini and tomato, they're naturally a little sweeter. So it's actually, odds are you're going to undersalt than oversalt it. Okay, now that the zucchini is in there and it's starting to sweat, I have about a pint of cherry tomatoes in here that I've just cut in half. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna squish them to help them release the juice. You don't wanna mash them because then you'll actually bruise them. You're just kind of grabbing and squishing, and that's it. This is obviously not gonna be enough, so I'm also gonna use a canned tomato, or a can of tomatoes, I should say. I'm gonna do the same thing with these. just to help them release. It's also fun. It feels really nice. I love playing with my food.
So I have a big tomato, and how do I cut it? Just like,
Yeah, like how do you chop it up into a smaller pieces?
yeah.
Sure. So let me rinse my hand really quick and I will be right back and I'll tell you how to do it. So the principle behind dicing a tomato is going to be very similar to what we did with the onion, except you want to be careful because tomatoes are obviously very squishy, so you can't like apply too much pressure. So you want to take your tomato. Let's pretend this giant onion is your tomato, okay?
Okay.
You're gonna put it down on your cutting board. You wanna do the same thing where you wanna just kind of like pierce the skin with the tip of your knife and then bring it down and then cut open the top, right? So you're gonna remove the top. So this is where the stem grows out of the tomato. It doesn't really matter which end you do with the tomato. And then you're gonna cut it clean off, okay? So you're trying to create a flat surface. So basically like this. So this is the top of the tomato. I'm gonna pierce it with the tip of the knife and then I'm gonna bring it down. And now I have a flat surface. So now that you have a flat surface, you're gonna actually turn the flat surface, this part, which is flat, down onto the tabletop or onto the cutting board, okay? And then you're gonna do the same thing with now the top. You're gonna pierce the skin and you're gonna bring the knife down and cut it in half. So like this. So that way you have two halves. So if your knife is really sharp, you can get away with cutting it skin side up. My knives tend to always be dull for whatever reason. And so I actually have to flip it over and do the skin on the bottom and then the flesh on the top. So basically the middle that we just exposed, you're gonna cut it into strips like this. And then you're gonna turn the strips around and then you're gonna cut them into squares. And you're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna put them, once you get them diced, put them in a bowl and squish them with your hands. Okay, my zucchini's starting to cook. So now I'm going to add my tomato. Zucchini. When it looks like this and it's still super white, that means it's not cooked yet. It's not tender. It's still very firm. When it starts to cook and lose its water, it starts to look more like this. Okay, this is still also raw, but as it cooks, you'll see what I mean. And I will point it out to you. It basically becomes translucent. That's when you know that your zucchini is tender. So at this point, I just kind of want to get this to a boil. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit. I'm going to add some salt and pepper. As you can see, I generally don't measure my salt and pepper because I feel like some days I want food that's a little bit saltier or spicier, and some days I want it that's a little less. I also grew up in a household with people with varying health issues. So if you have high blood pressure, for instance, salt is really bad for you. If you have low blood pressure, salt is very good for you. So like we always kind of had to have low sodium food because you can always add to your own plate, but you can't take it away from the big dish. Turn up the heat a little bit, cover this up, let it get to a nice steamy boil, and then we turn it down and let it simmer. And that's essentially your dish. If you want to add like jalapenos, you can add jalapenos to the base with the onions. If you want to add herbs, you can add herbs right at the end. If you want to add any seasonings, you are welcome to do so. I'm kind of a purist with this dish. Literally salt and pepper, sometimes a little bit of cumin, but not really. If you're ever making this dish and you're worried that you've overcooked your zucchini, or I've actually intentionally prepared it where I have different cuts of zucchini, where some are really small and they end up dissolving in the sauce, and it ends up thickening the sauce and adding a new flavor. And some of them are actually a little on the crunchier side and underdone because I really like the texture of raw zucchini and summer squash. That's just a personal preference. But if you end up cooking it and all of your zucchini is basically mush, do not worry. there's an easy fix for this. You just either use an immersion blender or a food processor or a blender, blend it all up, make it into into a marinara, and then add some pasta, make some pasta, and now you have like a super healthy vegetable-based sauce. So don't worry, there's really no mistakes here. It's just a matter of adapting to it. And you can see the colors already looking super amazing. And that's another thing that I really love about this dish is the colors.
I have one question.
Yeah.
How much cumin should I put in?
I would put like half a teaspoon. The only caution I give you with cumin is if you put too much of it, it ends up smelling like body odor, and no one wants to eat that. So I'm gonna go ahead while the zucchini's cooking away and prep my garlic for later. So this is how I peel my garlic. Get the clove out on the table, and then I use the blade of the knife and I just press on it, and that smashes it, and then it allows me to peel it really easily. And do it again. Some people like really smash on the knife. I always worry like if the knife slips and then I cut the palm of my hand, that doesn't sound great to me. So I'd rather do it slow and steady than do something for show. And then once my garlic is peeled, I'm just gonna dice it like a really rough chop. I actually love finding big chunks of garlic in my sauces. They make me really happy. So that is pretty much the last of the preparation that we're gonna do. So I strongly encourage you, as this is cooking, to grab a spoon and taste it, because you always wanna taste your food, make sure that it's the right salinity, the right spiciness, all of that. And if it's not, then we adjust. Okay, so let me grab some tasting spoons and we'll be right back. I probably don't need 7 spoons, but I grabbed all of them anyway, because why not? All right, let's give this a taste. It tastes really good, but it definitely needs salt. And it could use a little bit more pepper. And then always make sure that you put the spoon that you use in the dishes, because you don't want to accidentally use it again and then contaminate your dish. Even if you're just cooking for yourself like I am right now, I'm also cooking a pot for essentially 5 people. But you never know, somebody might stop over and you want to feed them, and like then you have food to offer. But if you've contaminated it with your own spit, it probably isn't the best idea to offer it to your guests. So now that I've added a little salt, I'm going to taste again and see where we're at. Looks nice. So interesting fact about tomatoes in the Middle East. So obviously plants take on a lot of the nutrients and the flavors of the soil that they're grown in. That's a no-brainer. Tomatoes in the Middle East are much more acidic. They actually taste closer to lemons than they do to a fruit. Well, I guess lemons are a fruit, but like closer to a sour fruit than a sweet fruit. So when we make our traditional Middle Eastern dishes, very often we'll add lemon juice to our tomato, which a lot of people think is crazy, because why would you add an acid to an acid? But it's just a palate thing. It's just something that we're accustomed to in terms of flavor. Let's see, zucchini still has a way to go. It hasn't softened yet. And a way to test how soft your zucchini is you just take out a piece on your wooden spoon, grab another spoon or a fork or a knife, and you just try to press it. And if it does that, it's not ready. But it's still probably yummy. Really good. So another clue on whether or not your zucchini is starting to cook is it'll start to change from like a really vibrant green to like a darker browner green. But this is why I love using the different colors, is because it looks a bit more like a rainbow, and it makes me really happy. And that's not because I'm gay, it's just because I really like rainbows. They make me really happy.
My thing is not as like liquidy as I was hoping.
Yes.
So is it because I didn't put in enough tomatoes?
It's okay. Sometimes the tomatoes that we use just don't have enough liquid in them, so it's totally not your fault. all I would do is if you have some sort of chicken stock or vegetable stock or broth, you can add that, or just water, straight
All
up
right.
water. Yeah. Start with like half a cup and then just keep adding until you feel like there's enough. And the sauce level is up to you. You know,
All right.
you can make it more soupy or thicker. It's up to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So when your zucchini is like 15 minutes in, that would be the time that if you were going to add fresh herbs, that's when you add it in. You add it in at around like the last 5 minutes of cook time. With fresh herbs, you actually want to leave them at the end because if you overcook them, they end up losing all their flavor and they turn bitter. With dry herbs, you always want to put them closer to the beginning because it gives them more time to kind of wake up. So my zucchini is doing well. So now I'm going to show you what to do with the garlic. Okay, so this is again, like wait until your zucchini is close to being done and then you do this step. But I want to show it to you nonetheless. Okay, we're going to grab a different frying pan, brand new. We're going to put that 1 tablespoon of olive oil that we put aside earlier. And if you do a little bit of extra olive oil, this is actually totally fine because what's going to happen is we're going to fry our garlic in this oil and the oil's gonna get infused with, okay, that was too much oil. That is not what I wanted. I'm gonna use it anyway because I actually have a huge dish, so it'll actually be fine. So we're gonna wait until our oil heats up a little bit, like a medium heat. You don't wanna go too high, you don't wanna go too low. And then we're gonna just fry our garlic until it turns brown, okay? So this is how my mom used to fry it. She would always fry it at an angle. And that way all the garlic is sitting in the oil and it fries at a more even temp. Obviously you want to be careful if you're going to do this on an open flame because if you're using like a gas stove or something, the flame can lick into the pot and then it'll ignite the oil and that is very dangerous. I'm just used to this method. I've done it a million times, so this is how I do it. So I'm going to keep it moving around so that it browns evenly. This will be the source of all your flavor. And what I want you to do before you actually add the garlic into the sauce, I want you to taste the sauce before you add the garlic, and then I want you to taste it afterwards, just to understand how much of an impact this tiny, tiny thing will do. If you're ever making vegan sauces or soups or whatever, this is a great way to add dimension and flavor without taking up too much work or adding too much fat or anything else. And it won't take long for these to just fully brown. So you can't walk away from this. All right, so that's the color that we're trying to get to. It's just browned. Here, I'll bring it closer to the camera so that you can see. And we don't want it to really go any further than that. And then what we're gonna do, we're gonna bring back our zucchini and all of it, including the oil, is gonna go right in. But be careful because this might splash, so pour it away from your body, okay? You're gonna stir that in and you're gonna let it cook alongside the zucchini for another 5 minutes. And that's it. Your dish is done. You can serve this with bread, you can serve it with rice, you can serve it with pasta. Traditionally, we ate it with pita or with white rice. Or you could just eat it straight up as a soup or a sauce. And like I said, if you end up overcooking your zucchini, just blitz it, blend it into a sauce, and then make some pasta on the side and just use it as like a marinara. It's really delicious. A great way to actually thicken sauces is to overcook vegetables in them. So if you're making a curry, for instance, and you want to thicken a curry, instead of just using the coconut milk, you can like blend butternut squash in there, like some sort of puree, and it creates a thicker base. And it's the exact same idea with this. So you're not going to make a mistake. You overcooked it, but you can easily cover it, you know, whatever. As long as it's delicious, who cares? And that pretty much sums it up. I hope you enjoyed today's cook along. And if you want to learn anything in particular, like if there's anything that you want to learn how to cook or bake, let me know. Let Casey know and we'll make it happen.